Our guest this morning, look through the papers for us, is the historian Tessa Dunlop. Morning to you.
Morning. Good morning.
History in the making at the moment. What an extraordinary time we're in.
Yes, we are.
Aren't we? I'm not sure if that's directly relevant to what you were going to pick out, but it is an extraordinary time, isn't it? You think of all sorts of things. You think of Iran, you think of what's happening with Brexit. It's the most extraordinary time.
I find it deeply alarming, actually. And funnily enough, I work with women who are 100 at the moment. And these are women who were old enough to be fighting with us during the war. You know, two of them worked as temporary civil servants in London during the war. And they shake their head. And one of them, who actually happens to be Mary Beard's tutor, she's an honorary fellow at Newnham College, Cambridge. She said to me, in the wake of the Brexit referendum and Trump, she said, "I'm very glad I didn't have children." Like really? This. So, yeah, they are worrying times, but it's up to us to remain level-headed. On that note, let's go, if we may, to forgive the newspaper, but it does have the best pictures, and this is television. We're going to go to
we'll hold it up here
the Daily Mail.
Don't worry, we'll hold it up.
They make a big hoo-ha about the lobster plot. This is Hammond, Philip Hammond, our Chancellor. This is the reference to level-headed, because I think some people, the Ken Clarke Brigade, would say he's possibly the least head-bangy of the cabinet.
Do you want to just explain first the lobster plot, the reference to lobster
plot.
And it's always easier when stories have a kind of a sort of tag attached to them.
Indeed.
This is because
Theresa May's old nemesis in some ways, George Osborne, has been dining with Philip Hammond. Now, if you live in London, you know that George Osborne has been running a consistent campaign. He's now the editor of the Evening Standard against the government stance on Brexit.
So they were dining over lobster?
Indeed, but the parallel, of course, is when Gordon Brown and Tony Blair used to dine together in Islington. Now we have, of course, they're Conservatives, so I think they were dining in Chelsea. Anyway, yo-ho-ho, that's an ally for Hammond, but he's not an ally in Cabinet, because we know George Osborne's now joined Fleet Street. Hammond, very isolated at the moment, away in America, clearly feeling the pressure from the hardline Eurosceptics who think the Chancellor is sort of all doom, gloom bucket about the prospects of Brexit. And to sort of, I think, compensate for that, when he was overseas in America, Philip erroneously called the EU the enemy, and of course then had to apologise for that gaffe. And it's a tad ironic, given he's one of the ones in the cabinet who's softer on Europe and is looking for this sort of midway
now. Quite a lot of people, the politicians in Europe, were asked about that particular line, the enemy. They seem to have been quite generous, saying, you know, slip of the tongue.
Well, you know why? Because they know Hammond's on their side. This is a man who's looking for conciliation, who wants some kind of 2-year brokerage deal. He doesn't want to fall off a cliff.
Because sometimes a word gaffe like that can have enormous implications. It sort of feels like it doesn't have that.
But also, if you looked, because of course journalists just take the top line, enemy, it makes a great headline. But if you look in the context in which it was spoken, he said enemy, the opposition. It was almost a sort of sporting reference. But what's, I think, really interesting about this whole debate, and it goes back to our sort of bigger position as to where we're at as a country, is that do we expect our leaders to be led by us, the constituents? So do we want them to do what we, the mass, say? Or do we vote in our leaders to lead us according to their conscience and what they know or believe is best for the nation? And it's the debate is it a direct democracy? Well, of course, a referendum is a direct democracy. You know, all the people get a say. But in the end, the execution of that referendum has to be done through representative democracy. So where do you place
big
the
issues,
onus?
Those.
They are big issues.
Where are you going to take us next?
We've got a couple of minutes, so let's.
Oh, sorry.
That's absolutely fine. This is something, you know, we could spend a long time talking.
This is. There's been. People are already talking. There's going to be change. There'll definitely be change. I'm very much hoping that there will be now constructive narrative and change, but it's incredibly important that the Weinstein case generates as much light as it does heat. This garners headlines in every paper: sexy actresses and a big bullish man who has clearly abused his position of power. What's interesting about this case in The Guardian is Rose McGowan, who accused Weinstein of rape, is saying that Amazon, the company under whose employ he was and she was, ignored her when she cried this as foul play. And this is really key, because I think this week women have had a sort of purging, if you like, of their stories of when men have annoyed them or pestered them. But for me, the crux of the matter here is when the man, and it invariably is a man, of course not all men, the man is in the position of power and the woman is within his hierarchy and is weak and fearful for her job and does things or feels she should do things, texting, touching, whatever, in order to hold her position but that are against what she actually wants to do. Now, how do you govern that? How do you make sure that doesn't happen? And the onus is on the employer.
So we should say Harvey Weinstein has denied the allegations of rape.
But I think the bigger issue here is not the Weinstein. There will always be pesterers, annoying men sniffing around. The issue is how we govern those men and how we deal with accusations when they're brought to the fore.
I can see you've got a picture of a stepladder in your next pile there, but I assume that's not what we're doing. Let's not talk about that.
This is a cheerful story.
Children are smarter than us.
Yes, isn't that gratifying?
And nicer.
To hear?
That's nice.
Because they are the future. And I think this is something really interesting where we always grew up believing that, children, they're very selfish and they behave badly and they're pushing the envelope, aren't they, all the time, especially when they're teenagers. But according to this research, actually, children are capable of delayed gratification, i.e. if you put a sweetie on the table and say, leave it, don't eat it, see how long you can leave it there for. And if you don't touch it, you'll get another one in half an hour. Considerably more children were able to hold out for longer nowadays than they were, say, in the 60s when they were like, maybe there was less good food, just post-rations.
Well, there were less sweets.
But there is, I think, an interesting issue. Maybe we need to re-gear slightly on the way we think about the generations. Is it really any surprise that we might find a softer, more tolerant generation coming up before us? The Wolfenden report was only acted on. Homosexuality was only legalised 50 years ago. Race relations, sex equality, all these things have come in the last 50 years, encouraging people to regard each other as equals, or at least try to. If you think before that, we were Britain, quarter of the world, under auspices. We were brought up to believe we were somewhat superior. It's very important to think that, really, and that doesn't necessarily breed the nicest type of mentality, a generous mentality. We were brought up to think there was a difference between people with different coloured skins or people were criminals who wanted to act in a certain way.
So we finish on a high, which is nice. And very good use of elbows, by the way.
Yes, it's kind of the big hug, the embrace of everyone.
You get the award for the morning so far.
Thank you.
We'll see you in an hour's time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.